Delayed gratification. I couldn't wait to talk to you about this topic. Delayed gratification is meant to be the secret of success for any go-getting achievers out there. You've seen the experiments where kids are meant to resist eating a marshmallow because if they exert their willpower, they'll be given a second marshmallow later. The results are pretty funny.
Why are you taking so long?
But apparently the results are also pretty inconclusive. A recent study used a much higher sample size and controlled for factors like social, economic and educational environment for the kid. And it turns out that once you control for those factors, resisting a second marshmallow isn't really a guaranteed pathway to life success. Rich kids who scoff that first marshmallow still succeed because they're rich kids. Poor kids who hold out for that second marshmallow find that 2 marshmallows rarely compensate for poverty and crushing disadvantage. It seems like willpower is not the cure-all for social mobility. But then why has this study been so widely cited since it was published in 1990? Surely it's because we are all willpower junkies. We want to believe that no matter who we are, where we've come from, what obstacles lie in our path, it doesn't matter. If we arm ourselves with unbreakable willpower and moral resolve, we can do it. On Friday, I had the huge privilege of being invited to the local mosque for an iftar. That's the meal at sunset celebrating the breaking of the fast during Ramadan. If you've never been invited to one, just ask a Muslim friend of yours. In my experience, Muslims are incredibly hospitable and eager to share. But having eaten this very tasty meal post-sunset, my friends all began to joke about how much they were putting on, how much weight they were putting on during Ramadan. It's a common joke that Muslims make during Ramadan, that the statistics bear out. In Muslim countries like the United Arab Emirates, 10% more food and drink is sold during Ramadan than at any other time of the year. And the teaching of the Imam last Friday really bore that out. He taught that fasting was an act of righteousness which Allah saw and then rewarded with a feast. Kind of like the marshmallow test writ large. It's a common theme with my Muslim friends that life is a test. If you forego the nice things now, you'll be rewarded in paradise with all those nice things times 1,000,000. And it seems to me like this is human religion as the marshmallow test. Christians fall for it too. I mean, we often think of God as some kind of social scientist carrying a clipboard and we are the subjects of the experiment, flexing our willpower muscles, and he is hoping that we pass the test. But friends, that is not how it works. And the debunking of the marshmallow test points to the way that it does work. You see, the debunking of the marshmallow tests tell us that there is something deeper than willpower. It's not willpower that leads to the good life. Both willpower and success in life flow from something prior. What is that something prior? Loving security, a sense of home, a place free from scarcity. That's what really helps you to delay gratification, and it's what helps you to live to your full potential. Now, I'll let politicians and educators and scientists debate what that means for social mobility, but let me tell you about what it means for you and God. God is not like the scientist in a white coat holding a clipboard waiting for you to pass the test. God is more like the loving family that nurtures you, gives you every blessing, every security, every advantage, and he gives it to you at the outset. Life is not about you and your willpower. It's about his loving security, which is good news. Because willpower is not our strong suit. It's the 4th of June, this is Speak Life, and you're watching the LIVEcast.
LIVEcast, LIVEcast, welcome to the LIVEcast, 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 welcome to the show. LIVEcast, LIVEcast, welcome to the LIVEcast, 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 welcome to the show. Welcome to the show,
Hello.
everybody. Did you notice the mistake, the deliberate mistake that I put into that LIVEcast video?
Well, I certainly didn't until you told me. So
Yeah.
whether anyone else will.
It's not the 4th of June, it's the 5th of June. Sorry about that, everybody.
Apparently.
I'm a day... Apparently. It's a Tuesday, anyway.
I'm questioning myself now whether it really is the 5th of June.
And you are Paul. And I am Spartacus. Great to be with you all on this Tuesday lunchtime. And I was just talking about the iftar that I was at
on Friday night.
Yeah.
And if you've never enjoyed an iftar before, big slap-up meal. Everyone comes, massive community feeling. And I got invited. The imam himself invited me. And so we were enjoying that together. And it was very... I felt like I was brought in on a kind of an in-joke within the Muslim community, which was wonderful, that they started to feel very comfortable with me, and they started to talk about how much weight they were putting on during Ramadan, which is famously the fasting month.
Right,
you know.
yeah.
And actually, this is a common joke among Muslims that during Ramadan...
I'm feeling a little bit self-conscious that I'm sitting here now. Like,
Go on. Yeah, that's right. 1.6 billion Muslims are able to resist, but you, Paul, you have not delayed
Not
gratification.
me. No.
Well, I've got some mini cheddars, so we're both very bad Muslims. I guess that's
very bad Muslims. I'm
very
sure.
bad Muslims. But what was interesting is that very much what the Imam was sort of teaching just before we all ate. He had a kind of a mini sermon about the meaning of Ramadan and the meaning of the fast, and it was very much this sense of we fast now. And then we get rewarded. And it was very much the case of, it's 9:05, it's sunset, go for it. And away we went. And actually, a lot of Muslim friends, Biddy Mutter is saying, I wish I could hear you. Are other people having difficulties hearing us? I hope we can be heard. Oh, I can hear myself, Biddy.
I can hear you.
we can hear each other. So, but very often, I subscribe to, and I'm a member of a number of different sort of Facebook groups, which is Christian and Muslim debates and that sort of thing. And very often what would happen is there'd be some kind of sex scandal about a Christian pastor, and that would be put up by the Muslim. And it was then said that what Christians really need to have is a belief that in paradise we can have all the sex that we want.
Right.
Because if sex is only for now, then we're gonna go
want to get that out of the way.
Run after fornication and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But if you know that you can have sex with whoever you like, in the future, then you'll be like the kid with the marshmallow, and you can say no to the marshmallow now.
Sure.
Because later on you'll get 2.
Yeah.
Or 72.
70. Yeah, whatever it is. Yeah.
So, but it's not just Islam that I think where people think in these terms. Although it is very striking that very often Muslims will talk to me about life being a test.
How do we? Because I'm completely on board with all of that, and how actually Christianity should be different. But because I know I'm probably. A phrase I use sometimes is kind of, the cross before the crown, and suffering now, glory later.
Yes.
The pattern of Christ's life is the pattern of our life, and we're denying ourselves. So
Yes.
where's what's the difference there?
I think there's still definitely a place for fasting. So Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, he doesn't say if you fast, then don't disfigure your face. He says when you fast.
Sure.
Don't disfigure your face. And so he was very much into secret fasting. Mm-hmm. So not in order to be seen by people, right? So that was very important. And he says it's very appropriate because, while the bridegroom was with, his disciples, we are not to fast because it was inappropriate for the disciples to be fasting in the presence of the bridegroom. But then he said, when the bridegroom is taken away, you will fast. It's a sad time because, can you imagine, the police dragging a groom, kicking and screaming from the wedding reception, which is kind of like this image of the cross.
Yep.
That the groom is being taken away, and then people are not then going to say, "Oh, pass me another slice of wedding cake." At that point, there is an appropriate nature to fasting, but none of it is about earning, a double portion later.
Sure.
It's not about God sort of waiting to see, our moral character and our resolve and our sense of willpower. It is very much about walking with Jesus through suffering and out the other side. But it's not that our suffering earns anything
that
later.
At the other end.
It's Christ's suffering that earns us for free, eternal blessings. So I think, there is definitely a time and a place for fasting in Christianity, but it is not the case that we do it in order to
obtain
yeah,
later.
Win more stuff later, which again I think casts God in the role of the social scientist with the clipboard. And what I found really interesting about the social science being done that was kind of overturning the marshmallow test is that what they found, surprise, surprise, is that it wasn't the willpower of the child, in that moment that was really most significant. What was most significant is whether the kid was in a secure, loving home with all the advantages of
that brings.
That brings.
Yeah.
And that's actually, if you're going to draw a parallel, that's actually the place of God in that analogy. The place of God is not the one with the clipboard, testing you. The place of God is actually the loving parent who's providing you with every blessing already, And it was just interesting looking at the marshmallow test being debunked, and actually it just makes sense, doesn't it? That actually, a kid who just scoffs the first marshmallow, he has not scuppered his chance of success in life. Because, maybe the kid knows that actually after the experiment's over, mum's going to take him for an ice cream anyway, so who cares, right?
Sure.
So actually, the rich kids could be scoffing the marshmallows and still succeeding very well in life, and the poor kids could be, delaying gratification and still failing in life because it wasn't really about the willpower. But how interesting that we want everything to be about willpower, because we don't want to be a victim of our circumstances, understandably, and we want to think that if we just pull ourselves together, pull our socks up, then we can make it happen in life. And actually, I think this later debunking of the marshmallow test points in the direction of the truth, that actually it's not really down to us and our willpower. It's actually much more about a loving environment that nurtures you and launches you into life. So, I don't know. That's what I took from that.
Fair enough.
But it's fair enough. It does seem like a lot of social science experiments are being kind of debunked or overturned or questioned, at least. And there does seem to be a little bit of sort of a crisis in psychology about the ability to replicate these tests. So someone might do a test with, the original marshmallow test was only done with 90 people, 90 kids. And now the later one was done with 900, and that's more of a proper sample size. But you do just wonder, how many times when you read about, the best studies show X, Y, Z, and you're like, I wonder.
Yeah.
In 10 years' time, what will they say?
Well, there's always ever shifting stuff, isn't there? But that could work both ways. I'm sure there are things that we would say, oh well, the research has shown blah, 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 but
exactly. Everyone needs to have a bit of humility about it. And what put me onto this was Glen Harrison, Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry at Bristol University. He tweeted out, when he was tweeting out about the marshmallow test, he said, "Yet another classic psychology study that did not hold up under longer scrutiny and relocation. Keep this in mind when you hear the assertions and claims of activists, whatever the cause." And I think that's right. There's activists on all sorts of sides, and there's confirmation bias, which is, I'm going to listen to the tests that confirm what I already believe, and I'm going to just ignore the tests that go in the other direction. And it also kind of made me a little bit skeptical about the way that you set up tests as well and set up experiments. There's this classic episode of Yes, Prime Minister about questionnaires and how taking surveys, the leading questions before the big question, completely reshape the way that people answer questions. Let's watch this Yes, Prime Minister clip.
Party have had an opinion poll done. It seems all the voters are in favour of bringing back national service.
Well, I have another opinion poll done showing the voters are against bringing back national service.
We can't be for it and
Oh, of
against.
course they can, Bernard. Have you ever been surveyed?
Yes, well, not me, actually, my house. Oh, I see what you mean.
Well, Bernard, you know what happens. A nice young lady comes up to you. Obviously, you want to create a good impression. You don't want to look a fool, do you? No, so she starts asking you some questions. Mr. Willie, are you worried about the number of young people without jobs?
Yes.
Are you worried about the rise in crime among teenagers?
Yes.
Do you think there's a lack of discipline in our comprehensive schools?
Yes.
Do you think young people welcome some authority and leadership in their lives?
Yes.
Do you think they respond to a challenge?
Yes.
Would you be in favour of reintroducing national service?
Oh, well, I suppose I might.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Of course you would, Bernard. After all you've told, you can't say no to that. So, they don't mention the first 5 questions, and they publish the last one.
Is that really what they do?
Well, not the reputable ones, no, but there aren't many of those. So, alternatively, the young lady can get the opposite result.
How?
Mr. Woolley, are you worried about the danger of war?
Yes.
Are you worried about the growth of armaments?
Yes.
Do you think there's a danger in giving young people guns and teaching them how to kill?
Yes.
Do you think it's wrong to force people to take up arms against their will?
Yes.
Would you oppose the reintroduction of national service?
Yes.
See? Yeah.
It's good stuff, isn't it?
It's all about how you frame it. Good old yes, Prime Minister. I remember that was my first television memory, actually. It was my parents. They would be sitting on the couch, and I'd be, with my nose just pressed up against the TV screen.
Really?
And watching Yes Minister and then Yes Prime Minister. And then I still remember there would be the laughter happens on TV. And I go, ha, 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 ha. And if my parents were not laughing, I'd sort of look back to them, like scorning them. Like, no sense of humour for you guys then. So, yeah.
I think my first TV memory is probably like Button Moon or something. So, what's your favourite, your first childhood TV memory? Oh, yeah, Yes, Prime Minister.
It was question time, I believe. And
yeah.
just me getting very angry at David Dimbleby. No, yeah. So yes, all part of, a healthy skepticism about certain social science experiments and that kind of thing. On the comments, Ben Virgo has said, "Hey, Glen and Andy, and Paul, I guess, are you aware of the emergency question scheduled to be debated in Parliament for this very moment, being put by Stella Creasy, which argues for abortion legislation being abolished right across England and Wales? It would mean the introduction of abortion on demand for any reason up to birth." So I've just been very quickly Googling that, and there does seem to be some kind of an emergency bill being debated. So if you're the praying type, please do pray. Shall I pray now? And let's just call on God. Father, we pray that you would protect the smallest members of our society. We pray that you would protect the weak and the vulnerable. We pray that we would, as a society, have a vision for life and a vision for the protection of life and the offering of hospitality to those who are weak and marginalized. And we pray that this would apply outside of the womb, and we pray that it would apply inside the womb. And so we pray that you would protect life, protect the unborn, and would you help us as a church to continue to lift up the despised, the weak, the poor, and the marginalized, to protect them and to show that in Jesus, this is your vision for life, not about the strong, but about the weak being lifted up. So Lord, would you protect life, even right now, even in Parliament, and would you help us to proclaim life wherever we are and to point always to Jesus. In his name, amen.
Amen.
So, we've been thinking about all sorts. We've been thinking about iftars and Ramadan. We've been thinking about the marshmallow experiment. But also, what we've wanted to get onto has been our thorny question for this week. You might know that every Monday we release a video about 5 minutes long where Paul and I address an issue that might be a barrier to faith. And suffering tends to be a big question that people have. And I think I mentioned last week that this never happens, but I was giving a seminar on the question of suffering where I sort of went through, here are the reasons why a good God might allow a suffering world. And the following day, a woman came up to me called Jenny, and she said, I came to this festival, festival, not a Christian, and my big question was, how can God allow suffering? And then you answered my question, and I had no more objections that I could make, and so I gave my life to Jesus last night, and I'm a one-day-old Christian. And you're like, well, that never happens. So, because I often poo-poo the idea that there are all these objections to faith, and you've just got to, help somebody to get over these different hurdles, and then naturally they'll just give their lives to Christ. But happened for Jenny.
That's been poo-pooed.
That's been
You've
poo-pooed.
poo-pooed your poo-poo. That's why I'm here, to give those kind of
thank you.
in-depth
analysis. The poo-poo of the poo-poo. Poo-poo squared. And so that rarely happens. The whole idea that we just get rid of someone's objections to faith, and then all of a sudden they come to Christ.
Because you kind of assume, don't you, that often when people say, "Oh, well, I can't be a Christian because of the suffering thing," really, that if you were to address it, they go, "Oh no, still not," and you assume that it's really just a mask to something else.
Yeah.
So actually, it is really unusual, isn't it, to have someone go, "Oh, all right then.
Yeah.
Oh, where do I sign?"
Right. But what was interesting, actually, in her story, is that she had suffered a lot in life, and she needed to know that there was someone who could handle her suffering. So I think there was also a desire that, not just that there's an intellectual answer to suffering, but that there's someone who could join her in the suffering and could handle it and could walk her through it.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings us to our thorny question for this week, which, our first 3 thorny questions about suffering were a little bit more on the philosophical side, I guess, a little bit more on the just the intellectual side of how can a good God fit with a bad world. But this week we're very much looking at how do I actually walk through suffering and how does Jesus actually help. So let's have a look at the first minute or so of this, and then we'll talk about it. Last time we saw how everything about the problem of suffering points to the truth of Christianity. A fallen world tells the Bible's story, the story of an original goodness that has been spoilt. Also in this series, we've seen how Jesus gives us the problem with suffering that we need. He allows us to call evil evil and to rage against it. What's more, Jesus gives us the solution to suffering that we all crave. He alone gives us a future for these bodies and this world. But now we get to the heart of the matter. How do we actually cope with suffering?
Here are 2 false responses. Firstly, stoicism. To your eye, that means stiff upper lip.
Now stand aside, worthy adversary.
'Tis but a scratch.
A scratch? Your arm's off.
No, it isn't.
Well, what's that then?
I've heard worse.
A Stoic takes suffering in their stride and tries to live above it as much as they can. That's not the Bible's way. In the book of Psalms, there are 150 songs to be sung by the people of God in their various stages of life. And the most common category of psalm is lament. In these songs, God's people cry out, "God, what are you doing? Where are you? This is awful." The Bible doesn't counsel us to detach from suffering, because God doesn't detach. He dives in.
Another false response is moralism. When bad things happen, our natural instinct is to figure out what went wrong or who went wrong. And often we can end up blaming ourselves or blaming the sufferer when we're meant to be comforting them. That was the response of Job's friends. Job lost his children, his wealth, and his health, and his 3 friends were meant to comfort him in his tragedy. To begin with, they do all right. For a week, they just sit with him and share the suffering in silence, but when they open their mouths, they prove themselves to be moralists.
There we go.
There we have it. And if you want to find out more about how that video ends, we've got a link to it in the comments to this live stream on Facebook, and or just search it on YouTube for our thorny questions.
Yeah, should be up there.
So the rest of the video kind of goes through the story of Job, really, and sort of talks about the wrong approach to handling suffering and the right approach to handling suffering, and the wrong approach is very much represented by the miserable comforters. I don't know if you've ever come across that phrase before, miserable comforters, Job's comforters. Maybe you've been called a Job's comforter in the past or a miserable comforter in the past. That is not a great thing to be called. Because here's what they do. This is the best thing that they do. In Job chapter 2, Job's comforters, you might know the story. Job has been struck down by illness, and he's lost his kids, he's lost his wealth, he's lost his health, he's lost pretty much everything. And then, if that were not bad enough, then come the friends to try to comfort him. And what's interesting is that they do, I think, try to comfort him. In Job chapter 2, verse 11, we meet Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, easy for me to say, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him. They set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. They definitely want to comfort him. They definitely want to sympathize with him. And then verse 12, when they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word, because they saw how great his suffering was. So this is the best thing they do. Best thing they do is shut up, you know, and just sit with Job in his suffering for a whole week, which is it's better than what we do, isn't it? You know, when someone's suffering, we tend to want to fix them pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah, I think often there's that. Or the other one is, I mean, I find personally, if I notice something bad has happened to someone, and you see them, sometimes you're like, oh, do I bring it up?
Right. Yeah.
And you think, is it better not to mention it? Unless they mention it, do they want me dredging this up?
Yeah.
And you're kind of almost you pretend like nothing's happened. You're like,
yes. And
that's a difficult thing as well. But I mean, the interesting thing about the Job's comforters there, isn't it, is that their intentions are good. But I mean, it's good to have that in mind, isn't it? Because when you read the bits about what they say to him afterwards, you can't help but think, well, these guys are just complete jerks.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't think their intentions are good from what they're saying, because they sound like awful human beings.
Yeah.
But the reality is, we probably sound exactly like that when we think we've got good intentions,
right? But
we just spurt out the kind of most ridiculous, unhelpful things,
right?
Just like they do. Well, surely, bad things don't happen unless you've done something wrong, right?
Right.
I mean, I hope none of us would say that. Quite as
plainly
bluntly and out like that, but I'm sure we kind of.
I think this is in the Bible because this is our temptation. And I think, these guys, they are friends, they're trying to sympathize, they're trying to comfort, but I think their theology means they can't actually offer the comfort that Job needs. But their theology is pretty much the kind of what goes around comes around theology, which although karma is not a Christian doctrine, it's pretty common, especially when I suffer. I'm instantly thinking, what did I do to deserve this? Let's go back. Was it that naughty thing that I did when I was 17? Is this why this is happening to me now?
Yep.
And even if I'm not a horrible moralist with you, I probably am a horrible moralist with myself, which is bad enough. But then, let's get a flavor for some of the things that Job's friends say. So Eliphaz the Temanite in Job 4 verse 7 says, "Consider now, Job, who being innocent has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed?" Which is very, just live a clean living life and, you'll be...
surely if you're good, this stuff wouldn't happen.
Yeah, and therefore, if something bad's happening...
have a think, Job.
Have a think. You do the math.
Go back through your week.
Yeah, exactly. Or your whole life, really.
Just see what's happened.
And Job's responses just tend to be just long, long speeches about, no, I haven't done anything specifically to merit this suffering. I don't think he's saying that he's absolutely pure.
Sure.
But he's saying, there's nothing that I've done that's brought on this suffering. I really am suffering and I really am upright. But, Bildad the Shuhite, he comes back with... "How long will you say such things? Your words are a blustering wind. Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? When your children sinned against him, he gave them over to the penalty of their sin." Wow.
Can you imagine today saying to someone who had lost someone in their family? Well, probably because they did something wrong.
Yeah.
You just staggering, isn't it?
Yeah.
You just wouldn't say it, would you?
We know not to do that in this really stark case. But I do feel like people, my cousin got lung cancer. Oh, have they been a lifelong smoker? Instantly, which...
Brought it on themselves.
Right.
It's that kind of thing, isn't it?
It's kind of... And statistically, there is, correlation. But, to go instantly to what is the bad thing. And I think the reason why we want to believe in karma is that if bad people have earned their badness, then all I need to do to, save myself from suffering is I just need to do the right things. I just need to live life in as good a way as I can. And then bad things can't happen to me, right? you know? And like Job is here to say, no, bad things can definitely happen to you, even if you're upright, you know, like Job.
Yeah.
Oh man, here's Zophar the Naamathite. Oh man, he talks about all these bad people, you know, to whom bad things happen, and then he says, Job chapter 11 verse 13. Yet Job, if you devote your heart to him and stretch out your hands to him, if you put away the sin that is in your hand and allow no evil to dwell in your tent, then you will lift up your face without shame. You will stand firm and without fear. You will surely forget your trouble, recalling it only as waters gone by. Life will be brighter than noonday, and darkness will become like morning. And that's all this, you know. Just redouble your efforts, Joe. Willpower.
Yeah.
You know,
Knuckle down.
pull
it together.
A bit more delayed gratification, Job,
Yeah.
and out you'll come. And that's when I love Job chapter 12. It's his response to Zophar there. Job replied, "Doubtless you're the people, and wisdom will die with you," which is just it's biblically warranted sarcasm. I think Job is probably the most sarcastic book. Like Job gets sarcastic. You know, wisdom will die with you guys, right? Because then the Lord shows up, doesn't he, at the end? And he's like, so where were you, Job, when I stretched out the heavens? Where were you when I created heaven and earth? You know? Tell me if you know. It's like, sarcasm is godly.
We've got a comment. We were just saying how surely people wouldn't say these kind of things today. And actually, a comment here from Steve Bockwell. Christians still do it. A friend of ours was experiencing infertility. They were asked, are there any Masons in your family?
Man.
And you just kind of think, wow, like...
Yep.
What do you even say to that?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
What's your first response, apart from, you know, clocking them round the heads?
Yeah.
You know, that would...
Yeah.
You'd be like, what are you?
Yeah.
The mind boggles.
Maybe some Masonic influence of violence has
In my
overcome
life,
you.
obviously, yeah.
Clearly. Amy Dawson says we have the prime example of suffering happening to someone sinless in the cross. Jesus has broken the link between sin and being on the being on the receiving end of suffering.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, at the center of our faith is an innocent who is suffering, which totally upends karma. Totally upends it. So we know the wrong thing to do. We know that we are not to come in with the rules that will keep you safe from suffering, and yet we always do it. You know, I remember being in a home group Bible study, and there was a woman in her 70s who was saying, "Please pray for me. I suffer with insomnia." And before she could finish the sentence, we were like, "Have you tried a drop of lavender on your pillow? Have you tried long walks by the seafront before night? Have you tried Test Match Special? Have you tried, have you tried the shipping forecast?
And,
Have you tried?" And literally for 15 minutes, we were like, giving her like all this homespun wisdom, and then like. She was then, after 15 minutes, able to finish the sentence. She said, "Yeah, I have been suffering with this for 50 years. I've tried all those things." What I was going to say is, can you pray with me that I will use that time at night prayerfully, and not just fritter it away? I want to draw nearer to God in the midst of my struggles with sleeplessness. And like, oh, that's different. We just wanted to fix her. She wanted to kind of draw nearer to God in suffering, which is very interesting. I thought of, in one sense, a hilarious, in another sense, a tragic clip about this whole issue of miserable comforters. There's this guy, I forget his last name, Chris somebody.
Sands, I think it was.
Chris
I think
Sands.
it was something like that one.
Who suffered with hiccups for years and couldn't solve them, and at this stage when he goes on to BBC Breakfast, he's been years without a cure for hiccups, and every few seconds he's hiccup. Can you imagine? Every few seconds he can't sleep right, he can't eat right. And let's just see what happens when he goes on national television and tells the world his problems.
Chris has been hiccuping, I think, every second since you've sat down.
Well, yeah, I have. I've been hiccuping every second since I woke up at whatever time this morning.
And this has been going on for nearly 2 years?
Yeah, since February 2007. It's been pretty much every day.
And had you had bouts of this, like long bouts of hiccups before, or was this?
Well, I got a 2-week bout in September 2006, completely randomly, out of nowhere. Hiccups 2 weeks, and they stopped on their own, and then they came back 4 months later, in February. And then they've just happened ever since.
You're a bit thin, if I can say, Chris. Have you been I mean, it must be hard to keep food down.
Yeah,
Have you lost weight?
Yeah, I've lost weight, and I've not been keeping any food down recently. So doctors have been prescribing me on nutrient drinks, so I can just have liquid food.
And they can't find a solution to your problem, because the hiccups when your diaphragm gets the wrong way.
Your diaphragm goes into spasm. Doctors don't even really know what the hiccups are. They know it's an irritation of the diaphragm. They know it's a spasm and things, but they don't know why we hiccup at all.
Right. Have you tried all the business of sticking your fingers in your ears and shutting your nose and drinking out the wrong side of the
You wouldn't
glass?
believe the amount of ways I've drunk water. I must have drunk every way you could drink water.
Yeah.
There's no other way you can drink water that I haven't tried.
Right. Jennifer says, drink hot milk sprinkled with white pepper. Have you tried that?
No, I haven't tried that.
All right, there's one.
Sugar is another one.
I've tried
you've tried
teaspoon
sugar.
of
Okay.
sugar, yeah.
Okay.
Haley in Newcastle.
Yeah, I've tried vinegar.
You've done vinegar?
You've tried that.
Haley in Newcastle says, hold your breath. Well, obviously you've done that. And count to 60 really quickly and then swallow.
I've held my breath and swallowed, and there's been other tactics where you hold your breath and then you swallow and then you try and take more air in and don't let it out and keep on swallowing.
How do you sleep?
You don't generally. I had about an hour's sleep last night just from getting so tired that I just passed out.
So when we were talking about you thinking of resorting to surgery, because that's the only thing, because if you're not eating and you're not sleeping, you are going to get very sick.
The thing is the surgery, all the surgery's going to do is allow me to keep my food down and stop me from getting any kind of heartburn. The surgery will not stop the hiccups. So it's a case of just getting surgery to make my life a little more comfortable rather than cure me.
Oh, Chris.
It's really difficult.
Awful.
Isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, without the kind of media attention and the word getting out, and the amount of public support people have given me, and especially our family and friends and my band especially, which haven't kicked me out yet, I suppose.
But have you tried drinking water out of the wrong side of the cup?
You can't watch it, can you? It's just like, it must be horrific what he's going through.
Right.
And they're like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. Haley from Newcastle asks, have you tried milk with white pepper? Was that one of the...
Yeah.
Actually,
with
no.
pepper.
He hadn't tried that, so maybe that's what...
And I love the, just hold your breath, count to 60 really quickly,
Have you
and swallow. I think it possibly, you expect him to go, well, I've been counting at a moderate pace, and that's probably... Oh, man, if I'd only known that,
We are rubbish, aren't we?
It's just awful to watch.
But But the thing is, I can see myself...
Well, because it's their natural desire in us. I think maybe it's a man thing as well. Is you want to fix a problem. If there's a problem, you think, well, why don't we just find a solution?
Right.
So, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that?
Right.
Holding your breath, or
Right.
peppered milk, or whatever it is.
But what was interesting about this story is that there was a Japanese surgeon. I think this is right. He was flying through Heathrow, and he happened to be watching this program while Chris is talking about his hiccups, and he was a brain surgeon, and he thought, oh, I wonder if, and then he got in touch with Chris, and he flew Chris out to Japan to have an MRI, and as it turns out, there was some kind of tumor pressing on, it was benign, but it was pressing on some part of his brain, and that was causing the spasms.
Yeah.
And so he had to go under the knife, and it was this very radical, drastic surgery, but that is what actually, fixed it.
Solve the problem. Yeah.
And I just think, maybe there's one person who does know the answer, and maybe they've got a drastic solution, but everyone else should just
not Brenda in Bristol.
Haley from Newcastle says, "Forget the brain surgery." Have you?
Yeah, but you realise when you see that. I mean, obviously, obviously, it was a horrific experience for him. You realise how. I mean, when we watched that clip earlier, I said it would have taken everything in me just to be like, if I was sitting there as him, be like, "Are you taking a mick? Are you seriously asking me these questions right now?"
Yeah.
You'd be fuming, wouldn't you?
Diane Murray has written, look, poor man, referring to Chris, when a family member was struggling with mental health issues, I was advised to consider dairy intolerance as the issue, amongst many other remedies. It was all meant well, but it's so hard to be on the end of. The worst thing is that I find myself doing the same thing to others now. I have to stop myself from trying to fix it, even having been on the receiving end. Yeah, so true. So true. Especially because, if you've come through something and then you feel like, oh, if someone else is going through that same thing, that their fix will be the same as your fix. And So actually, that thing that the comforters did with Job and actually sit with him for a week, that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And it's really healing. I remember when Emma was really bad with anorexia, and we were going to all sorts of medical help and psychiatric help, and this side of the pond, America as well, and no one was seeming to help. And then there was actually a couple at the Bible college where we were, and it was actually Mike and Heather Ovey. Mike, who tragically died at the beginning of last year, quite suddenly. They were amazing, and they just said, we don't understand what's going on, but why not every Monday night you come over to our place and you just talk us through what's happening, and we'll just listen, and you can teach us, because we don't know about it. So you just teach us, you tell us what's going on in your lives, and we'll pray. And that's what we did, and that was the most helpful thing of all, because they didn't try and fix things, they didn't try and pretend to any knowledge that they didn't have, but they weren't threatened by a problem that they didn't have the answer to.
Yeah.
And then when we prayed about it, I guess they were modeling to us faith in a God who does have the answer, even if we don't. And that was just hugely healing. And I think it's the opposite of the Job's comforter thing. It's to listen, not to be threatened by the problem, and then to maybe take it to God together. I think that's.
So I mean, I guess one of the things we've talked about there from the videos is moralism.
Yeah.
We haven't touched much on the first one. We talked about the stoicism.
Yes.
Because I think that maybe that's a different side of it, isn't it? Maybe less of a fix-it mentality, but just a kind of, we grin and bear it mentality.
Yes.
And put on a brave face. And I wonder whether... I'd be interested to know how cultural that is. Because we talk about the kind of British stiff upper lip and whatnot, and I don't know what the Australian culture's like.
I mean, Australian males are pretty much, let's not talk about the problems, and no worries, mate, no worries. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wonder whether that's the same in other countries where perhaps people, but men as well, are maybe more expressionate about stuff.
Yes. Yes.
Because I find myself saying all the time, like, oh, you're getting by, not bad,
right.
like it's
worse
fine.
Things happen at sea.
Yeah, I've had worse, all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Almost in a sense, because you don't want to make a big thing of it, so you're just like, well, I'll just...
Yeah. Yeah. So what would it look like to resist both moralism and stoicism? And I think it would mean, you can't get into a conversation with every person who asks you how you are. Well, let me tell you about the test results.
They'll soon stop asking.
It's the postman. Okay, the postman's got around to do. So there's a time and a place for it. But I think we do need to be less dismissive of the stuff that we're going through, and kind of less stoic in our responses. And I think suffering teaches us that, because when you really go through something like what Job's going through, how do you finish the sentence? I've just lost all my kids. I've lost everything. Still, worse things happen at sea. Lightning doesn't strike twice, and count your blessings. How do you finish a sentence when it's kind of like, So there's a good friend of ours who has a degenerative disease that just, unless there's an incredible miracle unheard of in the history of humanity, they will just get worse and worse and worse and die. And that's it. And that, and yet, they talk about the struggle of coming every Sunday and people saying, and so how's it going? And any developments? And, they have confessed to us they feel very tempted to say, oh, yeah, degenerating onwards.
Again, still degenerating.
Yep. Any developments?
Yep, much worse.
Much worse,
Yeah.
So how do you finish a sentence when you're like, I've got a degenerative fatal illness, Yeah. Tim Keller tells a story of a woman in his congregation who she did have stage 4 cancer. She had young kids. And when people said, how are things going? She said, well, still got cancer, but nothing a resurrection won't fix.
Yeah.
Which is quite good, actually. I think that's kind of...
Do you think, because we mentioned briefly, I think, in the video, didn't we, that when you look at the Psalms, there's like 150 songs, and actually there's a large portion which are laments.
Yes.
Do you think we've lost that kind of... that category in our... Well, just generally, but in our singing and stuff particularly, like we don't really...
Right.
I mean, I know the worship kind of leader at our church, a music director, she was talking about, she has to speak at, I can't remember if she's done it already or whether she has to in the future, speak at something about this category of lament. And she was saying, like, if you've got any ideas, you know, because we just don't really have it anymore.
Yeah. We've got Matt Redman, you give and take away, you know. Which is from Job 1.
Absolutely,
you know.
yeah.
But literally, I've got a sermon on Psalm 88, which is the darkest of the lament psalms. And like when I do it at a church, they then ask, so what would be an appropriate, you know, song to sing afterwards? And after Matt Redman, what's the first line?
Blessed be
your name.
When found in the desert place.
Yes, when I walk through the wilderness. Apart from that song, I don't like.
No, that is probably the most.
I don't know what else to say.
No, I'm not sure.
You know,
let us. If anyone's got any other suggestions, it'd be good to know. But
yeah,
maybe we are missing a trick in that as well. Because there is. The reality is that there is a lot of people are suffering, aren't they? You know, so and there is a. And it's good for us to come and sing about good biblical truths, but also, you know, there is this category of lament. Do you think we've lost that partly? I don't know whether is that in all Christian circles, or do you think it's more in our circles? Because particularly in more conservative evangelical circles, we're very wary of subjective emotion type things, even though that's what a lot of the Psalms are full of.
Right.
So you know, we might look at some of those songs and be like, oh, hang on. That's not everyone. That's not for everyone. Whereas we can sing these truths about Jesus, and we're like, well, this is true, and that's what it is, you know. And that's the kind of things you hear anyway. Do you think that's part of it, or do we just?
Yeah, well, I think at very conservative kind of psalm singing churches, obviously this isn't a problem because they just sing the psalms, and and God's hymn book happens to have about 50 laments, you know, out of 150, which is sobering. It's interesting, Christopher Ashe did a sermon series on Job, which was then turned into a very good book on Job. Something about the storm. If someone remembers the name, you can tell me in comments. And what was interesting to me, I did some work on Job a few years ago and listened through to his sermon series, and there were a couple of Sundays where they did not sing at all, because he was going through the middle chapters of Job and there's just the suffering that Job was going through. And he just said, we just don't have the songs to sing that could possibly reflect the material.
It would just jar too much to get up and sing something else. So
if you're a worship, you know, singer or a musician, there's a gap in the market. Let's have some more lament. Gail Denise writes, I've lost nearly all my family, but God is still in control. She says a friend has lost a husband and 2 daughters to cancer, but she knows where they are, so can keep going. And then she says, focus on Jesus. And I think that brings us to what is, I don't want to say the answer to suffering, but what's the response? Where do we turn? We don't turn to stoicism. We don't turn to moralism. And in the video, we talk about Job chapter 16, where Job, at the beginning of the chapter, he calls them all miserable comforters. But then from verse 19, he talks about a real friend in suffering. And he says, even now my witness is in heaven, my advocate is on high, my intercessor is my friend, as my eyes pour out tears to God. On behalf of a man, he pleads with God as a man pleads for his friend. And just 4 beautiful names for Christ here. A witness who sees what's going on, an advocate who sticks up for us, an intercessor who prays for us when we can't pray for ourselves, and a friend who knows us and loves us and will see us through. I just think that's a beautiful thing that in the middle of Job, you know, he asks the why question 20 times, like 20 times he asks God, why is this happening? He never gets an answer.
Yep.
He never gets the specific, well, actually the reader knows why. The reader in chapters 1 and 2, you know, the curtain is drawn back and we see what had happened in the heavenly realms that meant that he suffered. Job doesn't know that. He asks 20 times. He doesn't get a reason for why he's suffering, but he does get a friend, you know, in the middle of that darkness. So there's a friend who meets you in the middle of the darkness. And then in Job 19, wonderfully, there's also a hope beyond suffering. And again, this is what we need, a hope beyond suffering. Verse 25, Job 19, verse 25. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. And again, this is such an embodied hope. It's the Redeemer lives, not the replacer. It's not that Jesus is going to replace all this suffering world, put that in the bin and then start afresh. He's going to redeem, even the suffering that we go through. He's going to actually, his own scars, he keeps into eternity, and he somehow redeems those. And then, he's going to stand upon the earth. Isn't that beautiful to know that there's this embodied earthly future, resurrection future? Verse 26, after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. So that those that we've lost, that we love, that love Christ, we're going to be reunited with them. We're going to hold them, not just see them, we're going to hold them. And then we will see God. That's the center of our vision for the future. God himself, who we will see. And there is that face-to-face future coming. And I think, we can ask our why questions, and Job asks his why questions. The psalmist is always asking his why questions, and that's okay. We probably won't get an answer to why X, Y, and Z happened, but we do get a friend in the middle of the suffering, and we do get future, a future that is beyond that suffering. And I guess that's all we can have, really. And then I love Job. Where is it? I wrote down the verse. Job 36:16. Isn't this is a beautiful kind of summary of the whole of what God is doing? What is God doing in the midst of suffering? He is wooing you from the jaws of distress to a spacious place free from restriction, to the comfort of your table laden with choice food. He is wooing you from the jaws of distress, and he's bringing you through that journey, and it will involve suffering because it did for Jesus. But through it, we have a friend, and beyond it, we have a future. So
yeah, there's a few bits in the comments. A few people have mentioned. I think Diane Murray's mentioned God is good all the time. All the time, God is good. I don't know if that's a reference to a specific song, but she mentions Christ alone, cornerstone.
Right, yeah, that is good.
That one. The one that came to mind to me actually, as I was looking at, was there was a Tim Hughes one, which when silence falls. I think that was the name of the album, but it was on there as well. I've had questions without answers. I've known sorrow. I've known pain.
Okay.
But there's one thing I'll cling to. Jesus, you're faithful. You're true. And actually, that's nearer the end of lamenting. Just saying, actually, stuff is pretty bad, but I cling to you in the midst of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
A few bits here as well. I think we've got someone, Darren Hill. When I was going through a time of suffering, I was given this comment: God will only let you suffer what you can handle and no more. This was told to me after I lost my father-in-law to a stage 4 brain tumour. To me, that was a cop-out.
Yeah.
And I think there's a danger, isn't there? Like, even when we kind of just drop it, there's a danger of dropping almost trite Christian niceties at people.
And it's false. God does give you more than you can handle. Like, he does. What people are kind of misquoting when they make that comment is 1 Corinthians chapter 10.
It's about temptation.
It's about temptation, exactly. 1 Corinthians 10 verse 13. God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. That's about, whenever you fall for sin, like, you didn't have to. Right, you could have had a way out, and it's about temptation, and he doesn't tempt you beyond what you can bear. It's got nothing to do with giving you suffering beyond what you can bear. Paul, again and again, like in 2 Corinthians, for instance, talks about having suffering that is far more than he can bear. And when you look at Jesus in Gethsemane, can you imagine Peter going up to him, "Don't worry, Jesus, God will not give you more than you can bear." And, it's, the cup of suffering for even
Thank goodness
for him.
this isn't too much.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you could summarize what he says in Gethsemane as, "This is too much. I cannot handle this. I'm overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death."
I think we talk about we can ask the why questions. I think there's different types of why, isn't there? There's the
Right.
there's the why questions, which why this specific thing, why has this event happened to me in particular? And actually, that's not something I think we can really know.
No.
But there is the case, there is those things of clinging to. But if I really trust that God, is working for my good in all things,
right,
then it forces me in suffering to think what.
Right.
You might not be able to see it yet. I think I've talked about suffering in the past. It's a bit like obviously all flawed examples, but it's those Monet paintings. When you're up close to a Monet painting, it's just a blur and a mess. It doesn't make any sense. And actually, it's only when you're able to draw back from it you can see the big picture. And the reality is that obviously God can see that big picture, and we may get a bigger glimpse of it over time. That we may be able to look back over some events in our lives where bad things have happened and say, I can see how God has used that for to grow me, to deepen my relationship with him, or to help others in later situations. But it also might be the reality that we will never see that big picture until at least the other side of eternity, perhaps.
Right.
And I wonder whether so it's okay to ask why. We just might never get that specific, but we can trust hopefully that God is good and is working in that.
It's funny, at the end of the seminar that I gave at this festival, the seminar was all about how can a good God allow a bad world, and that's where Jenny came along, and she became a Christian after that. But there was another guy who came up to me afterwards, and he said, is it ever right when someone asks you why does suffering happen, just to say, I don't know.
Sure.
I just don't know. And actually, I think there's something very profound about that. There's something very profound. If you model to the other person, this doesn't shake my faith, but no, I don't know why suffering happens. Somehow there's a good God, and this really sucks. And both those things are really true. I have no idea how. And I just wonder whether actually a community of believers, the church, that actually is able to have some kind of spiritual buoyancy in the midst of suffering. I just think that's an incredible apologetic to the world without having answers, without having a technical apologetic. I think just the actual existence of Christians who are they don't drown in suffering.
Yep.
And I think that is what 1 Peter is talking about. 1 Peter is talking about aliens and strangers in the world, and people ask in 1 Peter 3 verse 15, what's the reason for the hope that you have? And obviously people are looking at believers who are going through horrible, horrible times. And when you read in 1 Peter, they're getting it from all angles. They're getting it from, the emperor. They're getting it from kings and authorities. They're getting it from slave masters. They're having difficult times everywhere. And yet somehow they seem to have a hope. And so I think when someone asks, what's the reason for the hope that is within you? I think actually the most basic thing is I don't know how I would have gotten through last year without Jesus. I don't know. I don't know why it's happened. I don't know how I've gotten through, but Jesus somehow sustains me. And I think that is just a really powerful apologetic. I think it's actually the original apologetic. That's where we get the word apologetics from. 1 Peter 3 verse 15, that the answer that we give to someone who's asking us for the reason for the hope that is in us. It's apologetics has come to mean learning a slew of philosophical arguments, but I think actually a suffering community of believers who still are clinging onto Christ and suffering well and having some kind of sense of emotional buoyancy in the midst of it, or even not having emotional buoyancy, even just saying this really sucks, but still I'm a believer. Somehow God's getting me through this. I think that's an incredible apologetic. And you don't have to go to a seminar, to...
No.
But it's hard won. It's hard won. You've got to know the faithfulness of God through the storms.
I think when I think of how we respond to suffering, the example that always comes to mind for me is Jesus with Mary and Martha at Lazarus' tomb.
Yeah.
How basically they both come and ask, literally the same question, or it's not really. If you were
had
here,
been here,
my brother wouldn't have died. And I've always, when I've talked about it, I've said, to me, it feels a bit like an accusation. Like, where were you?
Right.
Like, why did you let this happen? You could have stopped this,
Yeah.
but you didn't. And Jesus has, even though the question is identical, he responds very differently to both. And the first, Martha, isn't it? I think is it Martha? Or
Martha gets
Martha
the resurrection
Bible
of
study.
life. Yeah.
Yeah. So he, and then with Mary,
Right.
he weeps.
Jesus wept.
And I think there's no pat answer to, it's like this. It's not when people say, "How do you answer the suffering question?" Well, there isn't really a answer. And I mean, we've done, even with doing 4 videos on it, we're not saying like, here are 4 answers and you trot them out in whichever order. Some people just need someone to sit with them for a week, or to weep with them. Other people do need to hear, those biblical truths to kind of gird them up and, strengthen them to keep going. But I think in a sense you have to sit with each person individually on that, don't you?
And just to have the confidence that I don't need to know the answer and I don't need to give the answer in this moment, but I can entrust that to Jesus, who is the God who has suffered. And I don't know how it all fits together, but I look to the cross and I see a God who has suffered, and I look to the resurrection and I see a God who's got a future beyond suffering. And I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but somehow he's going to get us through. And I think whatever we can communicate of that simple faith, I think is the most powerful apologetic we can give. Hey, it's 2:00. Back to work, people. Back to work. Enough sloping off to Facebook. It's been great being with you guys. We have a great week ahead. I'm doing a couple of interviews that hopefully you'll see soon. Tomorrow I'm doing an interview with Scott Jones about my upcoming book, Long Story Short, and then on Thursday I'm doing an interview with Andrew Wilson about he and his name has escaped me, from Durham, and Alistair Roberts. They've written a book called Echoes of Exodus, a terrific book, and I'll be talking to him about Echoes of Exodus on Thursday, and stay tuned, we'll be broadcasting that interview on the livecast in the future. But I think that's all we've got time for.
I think so.
We've
kept these people far too long already.
Far too long. So have a great week, everybody, and see you again.
Take care.